Welcome to part 2, where the panel discuss various supplementation to mitigate oxalate issues, and Richard presents his views about potassium might be a better mineral than calcium.
That's why you're here, because there are supplements that help with this issue, like Chancer Pydra, which I think is a herbal thing, or phosphorus, and others. Yet no one ever talks about it. Why? Does that ring a bell with you, Sally?
Yes. Chancra Pedra is a very popular, what they call stonebreaker herb. It's said to help you break up kidney stones. It's not necessary, because really the things you need to break up stones are citrate and enough calcium, and you need your pH in your body controlled. So it's one way to do it, but not my preferred way. I'm not really a big fan of playing around with herbs. They're drugs and they're complicated, and it's something you could become allergic to. It's simpler to make sure you have enough citrate in the urine. And you can do that using bicarb and using citric acid in supplements like magnesium and potassium and calcium citrate. Lemon juice is very helpful and well documented to have enough citrate. If you get a half cup of lemon juice a day, which is a lot, you can do a lot to break up kidney stones and help you avoid getting kidney stones with basically keeping the pH right in your urine. And there's lots of tools for doing that. You don't necessarily need a magic herb to do it. Some people think it's benefiting them, but the literature is pretty equivocal about whether it is even effective or not. I'd say that the citrate supplements, we have the documentation for. I see it routinely in people. Calcium very clearly supports lower pain and supports oxalate clearing from the body. I have guesses about the mechanism, but no one's actually proven the various mechanisms involved. Even topical calcium lowers pain and helps with the symptoms of like itching and these kinds of things that can happen.
Now, people are going to think this is scripted, Sally, because Cami, who is actually responsible for you being here, so thank you, Cami, that was great, has said you have to discuss the calcium supplementation, as you just did, with Stephen and Rich. So, Rich in particular, I don't know if you know, but Richard runs the Keto Pro shop, designs his own electrolytes and supplements. So this is a big deal. So did you want to fill out that question for me, Rich?
What I found early on is that obviously, oxalate, poisoning is a problem, and then the dumping issue. But and I know that you're a big advocate of calcium supplementation in order to combat the dumping effect. But I found an alternative method which I wanted to run by you. What I found, this is my own experience and what I've found with clients and customers that I've been working with. So, you gravitate into this low carb ketogenic lifestyle and everything is brilliant for a few days. You're feeling absolutely incredible. But then you start to experience things like headaches and fatigue and feeling nauseous. And as we know, it's keto flu, and it's to do with the lack of electrolytes, particularly sodium. And because many of us come from this area of insulin resistance, and it's insulin that drives most essential hypertension. Essential hypertension is driven by insulin resistance. But when insulin is elevated, it pulls sodium from the nephrons in the kidneys back into the blood. Wherever sodium goes, water follows, and it contributes to the high blood pressure, which is why we fear so much sodium. But when we begin this low carb ketogenic journey, and I'm looking on this screen over there now because it's on this screen, so apologies. But this insulin drops, and then it signals the kidneys to release sodium from the body, from 4 points in the nephrons in the kidneys, and it leads to keto flu. So now we're feeling fatigued and we're feeling nauseousness. So, but we don't want to give up. And this is where most people
throw in one little point here.
Fire away.
And that is high oxalate also causes the kidneys to waste sodium.
Brilliant. Yeah.
So while we're eating high oxalate and also while we're clearing high oxalate, you cause additional losses of sodium.
Yeah. Which further drives, I guess, all of these negative downstream.
Which is sometimes why it's hard to tell if you have keto flu or oxalate dumping, because a lot of the same derangements can be going on for both reasons.
So how long could this oxalate dumping, I mean, it isn't something that occurs, I'm guessing possibly it does within a few days or a few weeks with some people, but it can go on for prolonged periods of time. So what's the longest you've seen, the effects of oxalate dumping occur?
Well, there hasn't been a very long period of people awarely using a low oxalate diet for anything other than kidney stones. So we don't have a long history to go by. I'm still clearing oxalates, and I'll be 10 years in
Wow.
a few weeks.
Wow.
I believe strongly that my back and tendons of my shoulders, pecs, and the spine are still struggling with oxalate deposits.
Wow. So incredible. It's a lifetime of abuse, I guess, isn't it?
It's actually, you can create what is changes to your physiology, your tissues, and your metabolic well-being by eating high oxalate that might have some indelible impact on your health for the rest of your life. And that's why it's so important to think about managing the clearing process versus just trying to power through it. Powering through it is just toxic. You're better off in that asymptomatic stage you were in when you were eating all that high oxalate food. You don't always get symptoms if the body's carefully partitioned it off and wrapped it up and has it buried in your spine. To some degree, some small amount of that is perfectly tolerated, and it will keep you going until a proper 95-year-old type age of final demise, right? You're not going to be perfect in this life, and you're certainly not going to be perfect after you've been poisoned with oxalate. So too bad you're not still sharing your slides. I just thought it's interesting to compare the keto flu and the sodium and the electrolyte derangements and adjustments that go on with both the keto, because so often now it's coming together now that more and more people are picking up on the idea that meat's not what's killing you. Meat has lots of nutrients and is a healthy food. I think that's the main message in the carnivore world is, hey guys, you don't have to be terrorized by meat.
But would you like me to carry on with this thing quickly? Because I know that how long have we got you for, Sally? I think
just a few more minutes. I have to give a big group discussion today for my folks. So
right, I will smash through this really quickly, Steve, if that's okay. And coming on to this, basically we're in this position where we've just adopted a low carb ketogenic lifestyle, suffering with a keto flu. We've hit the internet and we've established that it's because sodium has dropped. So now, we've been told all our life that sodium is detrimental to our health. But we consult the oracle, we look at Mr. Google and search YouTube, and we come across studies such as this one. And this study covers 17 countries, over 100,000 participants, and it shows an inverse association, basically showing that the lower our sodium consumption, the higher our risk of death, with the sweet spot being between 4,000 to 6,000 milligrams, and arguably even 10,000 milligrams per day is more optimal. And the thing with this study is that it measures excretion and not consumption. So we can argue that, what is lost is at least what is consumed. So now we understand how important these electrolytes are, particularly sodium. We begin to supplement, and now we begin to feel a lot better on our keto or low carb carnivore type journey. We're going along merrily. And I think you're going to love the next picture. Suddenly we start suffering with oxalate dumping. So back on to Mr. Google, consult the oracle. We realize what's happening, and we understand that there's an issue to address. But now we're in a state of elevated sodium. And the thing with sodium is excess sodium depletes potassium. So our sodium's up, potassium's down. Now, low potassium, it can impair insulin secretion. It can increase hypertension, lead to shortness of breath, increase blood pressure, because potassium is a vasodilator. It depletes calcium from the bones, which can lead to further issues in regards to kidney stones. Potassium is imperative for waste management within the body, brain function, fatigue, all of these things. So now we're in this situation where we're taking excess sodium. So sodium's up, potassium's down, and calcium's down because this potassium is depleting the calcium. So now we understand that citrate, as you mentioned earlier, is a good tool to use. So we begin to supplement with magnesium citrate. But magnesium citrate can have another downstream deleterious effect and lead to toilet problems or bowel problems. So we revisit and look at calcium. And calcium is, a fantastic supplementation. It's got a massive affinity, as you say, to oxalates and helps with combating these the effects of oxalate dumping. And apologies, I'm rushing through this because I know you're short of time. But the issue with excess calcium is that depletes magnesium. So now there's a specific ratio that the cells need within the body. And what I found when I was supplementing with calcium is that it led to excess cramping because the cells are now out of the ratio in regards to calcium. It affects two of the proteins within within the body, within the muscle, and it leads to cramp. So I was suffering with excess cramping. These proteins, myosin and actin, one's excitatory and one relaxes, and that's what magnesium does, isn't it? Magnesium relaxes the muscle, and calcium excites it, and that's the issue that I found with calcium supplementation, that I was suffering with this excitatory effect. But also, now that we're in this state of depleted magnesium, now magnesium, and I'll read this out really quickly. So magnesium assists in the activation of vitamin D, which helps regulate calcium and phosphate homeostasis to influence the growth and maintenance of bones. All of the enzymes that metabolize vitamin D seem to require magnesium, which act as a cofactor in the enzymatic reaction in the liver and kidneys. Deficiency in either of these nutrients is reported to be associated with various disorders such as skeletal deformities, cardiovascular disease, and metabolic syndrome. So now, because we've increased the calcium, it's put this magnesium out of whack. So it can lead to all of these other downstream effects. And this was the biggest one for me. Excess calcium consumption, both in supplementation and in diet, can lead to an increase of cardiovascular disease by as much as 15%, with one of these reporting dietary calcium intake of 700 to 1,000 milligrams per day can increase this effect of cardiovascular disease. So then I look at a standard sort of ketogenic or animal-based lifestyle. I'm pretty much carnivore. All I eat is beef. But, early on, I was eating lots of steak, cheese, and eggs. And I think, it's safe to say that that's probably a standard sort of protocol for people. Steak, steak and eggs and cheese. So when we look at the calcium content within the steak, I don't eat 100 grams of steak. So I'd eat around 500 grams, if not even more. I probably eat close to a kilogram of beef per day. But one meal I may eat about 500, which contains 95 milligrams of calcium. 100 grams of cheese would contain 720. And 4 eggs, which I don't think is an awful lot, would contain 100 milligrams. So now we're knocking on the door of 1,000 milligrams just through dietary values of calcium. And as we saw in one of those studies, that this can contribute to cardiovascular disease. So the last thing that I want to do is supplement with calcium. But even if we were to half that cheese down to 50 grams, there's still over 500, I think it's around 550 milligrams of calcium. So I'm always concerned then, and this is why obviously supplementing with calcium for me led to this this effect of cramping and things, So I began looking at the ratios of minerals in animal protein. So this is strip steak and ground beef. And this is a range of liver, heart, and kidney from calves, beef, and lamb. And I've put these into a rough Excel spreadsheet. So when we look at the calcium in ground beef, for example, is 11.6. So the magnesium is higher in nature than the calcium. Sodium higher again, and potassium around 4 times higher than the sodium. And we see similar ratios in the lamb, etc. So these are the ratios that nature sort of gives us, isn't it, as we live this carnivore ketogenic lifestyle. So what I decided to do is start increasing potassium citrate in particular. And we know that has an affinity to oxalate and can help with oxalate dumping. And it can also help combat kidney stones, as this study highlights. The higher the potassium intake, the less reoccurrence of calcium oxalate stones occurred. So my theory was that if we consume potassium citrate over calcium, this would then put everything back into nature's natural balance, where we're consuming. And these pillars are not they're not to scale. I've just chucked them in there to show the potassium, as nature intended, is 4 times as high as sodium, magnesium less, and calcium less again. But it seems that whichever one that we increase seems to kick some of the others out of whack, unless it's potassium that we increase further. And given the fact that we're in a society or live in a lifestyle that is incredibly low in potassium, this is where I found that supplementing with potassium citrate alleviated, it seemed to alleviate the effect of oxalate dumping for me, and the leg cramps, and it just put everything else back into what I felt to be a natural form of homeostasis as nature intended. And that's what I wanted to get your thoughts on. instead of supplementing with excess calcium, could we attain the same benefits through a potassium supplementation, potassium citrate in particular?
This is a big topic, and we can't cover it in depth in the last 2 minutes that we've got together. So we should come back around to it. And I have to say, I am a big fan of potassium. Potassium is very important for restoring the bones and teeth that have been destroyed by the oxalates. It's important in every way, as you said, vascular dilation and hypertension and kidney stone prevention. There's proof for all of that. I have been a big fan of potassium and encourage people to really pay attention and stay diligent with it. Potassium is an intracellular ion. You need to get it taken up by your cells. It's taken up better when there's insulin. That's when the cells know that there's a meal. That's when they do their best eating. So it's good to take potassium citrate with food because it lowers the chance it becomes a stomach irritant, and it improves the chance that it can get to where it needs to be, which is inside your heart muscle, inside your bone cells, etc. Now, calcium, the main reason it's so beneficial to oxalates is because it helps the colon excrete oxalate. Most calcium at best is absorbed at about 20% of what you take is absorbed. The reason we take calcium is so that it stays in the intestinal tract. We're not taking to absorb it. Calcium is an extracellular ion. And if you look more broadly, rather than just pick out one study, but if you look at review studies, the best conducted review studies that look at hundreds of studies show that taking calcium, whether it's a supplement or food, lowers mortality, heart disease mortality, all those others. So I'm not sure that the denominator based on that whole theory is that calcium will create heart disease. And I don't think that the science would necessarily concur with your conclusion. So we need to stay open to the fact that calcium can be useful, particularly in a situation where we know we have oxalate poisoning and we're trying to manage it. We are careful about calcium supplementation with oxalate because it literally promotes the clearing. And a little bit of calcium supplementation can make someone feel badly because it can turn on the oxalate clearing. So that's why so many carnivores get away with a zero oxalate diet without dumping, because they're not taking the calcium. That doesn't mean that taking calcium is really the problem. It does mean that they're sitting on a pile of unstable oxalate in the body's needing a tool to get it going. And so you got to be careful with calcium just because it could promote the clearing. And that's often, it's what I was saying before about accelerator and clutch. If you're going to start adding calcium, which will lower pain and help you sleep, and for many people with the oxalate problem that I work with, that's what it does for them. It even can help with their cramps. But you may need to be adding in more oxalate at the same time, but not literally at the same time. Like you need to separate it out, because we're adding oxalate as a signal to tell the body, don't clear out of the tissues because we're still eating oxalate, but here's some calcium in case you want to excrete some oxalate. So we're literally using calcium as a binder in the colon to help the colon become an excretion route for oxalate in the body. So there is plenty of evidence both in the literature and in practical application where calcium can be useful. But you're right that the electrolyte balance can be tricky to get right and can be a moving target. The truth is that calcium dysregulation in the body is really a matter of cell membrane function, because the cell membrane partitions calcium to be an extracellular ion. And when the when the membranes of the cells are damaged, they can suddenly be leaky and calcium rushes in. And of course, calcium and oxalate follow each other around. So when oxalate gets into a cell, calcium follows it and vice versa. So oxalate is a major problem with causing calcium dysregulation in the body. It's less about how much is in the diet as it is how much oxalate is in there, messing up the cell's ability to control calcium. And that's where you see odd calcifications in the vascular system and elsewhere can be a product of the oxalate poisoning. So it's a kind of a messy story to tell, because you can have the theory based on completely ignoring the oxalate problem, and we don't have enough science that shows how all these derangements work. But you see it in the more fundamental research and in the case studies how oxalate is causing this dysregulation of calcium. So it's complicated, and again, there isn't one answer for everyone. But from a point of view of preventing and reversing oxalate poisoning, calcium remains a tool to use. But like you said, in some cases, it's not the time to be playing with calcium.
Yeah, but
Sally, thank you so much for that. Rich, we've got our 8 o'clock on Rumble to do, and Sally said she's
Yes.
got to go.
Yeah, and we need to give
Um,
Sally a shout out as well, and a mention with her book and everything. But Sally, thank you so much for coming on. It's been an absolute pleasure chatting.
Likewise, I'm looking forward to getting to know you both more in the future.
Yes, brilliant. I think this is a topic we could speak about for hours and hours, isn't it? But
For sure.
Yeah.
I don't get tired of thinking about it because I have to witness the devastating harm that the high oxalate foods are doing to people. And it's unfortunate that the keto world is still pushing high oxalate foods, again, because people are trying to do what they're told is the right thing. I wish we could get our story straight.
Yeah.
Well, they need to read your book. So we've had the
certainly
image
do,
of your
yeah.
book, and there'll be links in the description to be able to buy the book. And I just want to thank you again for your time. And I hope we can have you back, because there's many people already messaging saying Sally needs to come back. So that was great. Thank you.
Lovely to be with you all. Thank you.
Yes, you too.
Oh,
Thanks,
and I just want to let you know, if anyone out there likes the book and likes what they're learning about oxalate, it would do us all a great service if we want to help others to do reviews on toxic superfoods, so that more and more people can find this information and not stay in the dark like I was for so long. We have a great opportunity to prevent some misery if people could find this topic. So thank you.
If you enjoyed this and like other similar content, then don't forget to check out the Carnivore Experience app. Links in the description. Richard Smith and Coach Stephen can also be joined on our Mighty Network community. Designed for low-carb, ketogenic, or carnivores, it is a great way to learn more and interact with others following a similar way of eating.